Humanity had spread itself among the stars like embers scattered from a great fire, each colony glowing with its own strength yet connected by the memory of Earth. For decades, the expansion had been peaceful, careful, and guided by a philosophy that prized resilience over dominance. The fleets that patrolled human space were not tools of conquest, but shields forged in the quiet understanding that danger, sooner or later, always came. Captain Marcus Hale stood at the viewport of the heavy cruiser Resolute, his face carved by years of service, his eyes steady as he studied the infinite black ahead. He was a man who wore calm like armor, every motion measured, every word chosen. Those who served under him often wondered if he could feel anger at all, or if the fires of youth had burned away, leaving only cold steel. Yet behind his steady gaze was a man who had witnessed humanity's darkest moments and carried them in silence. At his side, Commander Elias Vorn reviewed tactical reports with restless energy. Younger than Marcus by a decade, Elias still carried the sharpness of untempered steel, bright, cutting, sometimes unpredictable. He had a quick wit that he rarely dulled, but his loyalty to Marcus was absolute. Where the captain was stone, Elias was flame, their bond forged in the crucible of countless battles that demanded both restraint and ferocity. Farther down the command deck, Sergeant Kieran Dax oversaw a squad of Marines as they prepared equipment. His presence was less spoken than felt, a towering man whose silence carried more weight than most speeches. He had no need to boast. Every scar etched into his frame told its own story. Soldiers followed him because he was unyielding, the kind of leader who would walk first into the fire and expect others only to follow if they dared. To those who fought under him, he was simply Dax, a name uttered with equal parts respect and fear. The calm rhythm of patrol fractured when the Resolute received its first transmission from the species calling itself the Xeric. Their language, translated through algorithms, dripped with mockery. The message was simple. Humanity was nothing more than an infestation, a clever collection of animals that had stumbled too far from its home world. Their words slithered with arrogance, as though speaking to children who had pretended too long at adulthood. Elias's jaw tightened as the broadcast ended. "They call us pets," he muttered, disgust layered with disbelief. "Pets that have no right to the stars." Marcus did not respond immediately. He had encountered contempt before, from rival factions and hostile cultures. But there was something different in the Xeric tone, an intentional cruelty, a deliberate insult designed to belittle. He drew a measured breath, then turned toward Elias. "Do not answer them. Not yet." But the Xeric were not content with words. Days later, a human trade convoy was intercepted near the neutral edges of space. The vessels were found drifting, torn apart, their crews slaughtered, and their cargo scattered into the void. What stung deeper than the violence itself was the recording the Xeric transmitted across the open channels. Laughter, coarse and guttural, echoing over images of human corpses. They wanted humanity to see, to feel humiliation, to be branded as weak. When the footage reached the Resolute, the silence on the command deck was heavier than any battlefield smoke. Marcus watched the screen without flinching, though his fingers clenched behind his back until his knuckles whitened. Elias slammed a fist onto the console, his control slipping. They butchered civilians, families, and they broadcast it like sport. Kieran Dax stood rigid, arms folded, his eyes locked on the carnage replaying before them. He said nothing, but the faint grinding of his teeth betrayed the storm rising in his chest. Marcus turned away from the images, his voice calm but edged with steel. "They've chosen their war. Not against our fleets, not against our weapons. Against us." For the first time in generations, humanity felt the kind of anger that united rather than divided. It was not the shallow fury of politics, nor the fleeting rage of rival colonies. This was deeper, born from the insult of being mocked and the wound of seeing their people slaughtered without cause. The anger spread like wildfire through every station, every ship, every colony, until the stars themselves seemed to hum with its weight. Elias looked at Marcus, eyes alight with barely restrained fury. Then let's give them what they've asked for. Marcus did not smile, but something in his expression shifted, the faintest crack in his mask of composure. He glanced once more at the drifting stars beyond the viewport, then back to the men who waited on him. We will. But not with words. Not with half measures. They want to know what happens when humanity is angered. His voice dropped lower, a promise carved in stone. We will show them. The command deck stood in silence, but it was not empty silence. It was the kind that carried weight, a silence of agreement that needed no words. Elias straightened, resolve sharpening his restless fire. Kieran Dax gave the slightest nod, as if marking the vow already sealed in blood. The Resolute moved forward, engines burning brighter against the void. Somewhere in the darkness, the Xeric laughed, still believing themselves untouchable. They had not yet learned what it meant to strike a species that had endured wars across millennia, a species that had risen from ashes more times than history cared to count. And when they learned, it would be too late. The call to arms moved through humanity's scattered colonies like a current, irresistible and unbroken. No world hesitated, no faction delayed. It was not a question of politics or profit. It was survival fused with wrath, and wrath was the one resource humanity never exhausted. From the icy bastions of Europa to the desert foundries of Mars, ships lifted from gravity's grasp, their hulls painted in the silent oath of vengeance. For the first time in centuries, every starborn outpost and planetary government spoke as one voice. The Xeric had done what no other species had managed. They had made mankind angry. Captain Marcus Hale stood in the War Council chamber aboard Resolute, surrounded by projections of Allied fleets rallying toward the conflict zone. His hands rested behind his back, his stance unyielding as a dozen officers spoke over each other, their voices thick with fervor. Where others burned with the eagerness to strike, Marcus remained a pillar of restraint. Fury had to be honed into precision, not allowed to cloud judgment. He listened to each report, each proposed strategy, weighing them with the careful patience that had made him commander of one of humanity's most feared vessels. Elias Vorn leaned forward over the council table, eyes darting across tactical overlays. His voice carried urgency, sharpened by a deep resentment that had only grown since the massacre. We cannot give them space to breathe. Every hour we wait, they prepare. We must strike at their outposts immediately. Fast, brutal, overwhelming. His hand swept across the glowing projection of Xeric-controlled sectors, marking targets with impatient precision. Some officers shifted uneasily, their instincts pulling them toward caution, but Elias pressed harder, his fire unrelenting. They think us emotional. Let us prove them right. Let us become the storm they cannot contain. Marcus raised a hand, silencing the chamber. His gaze settled on Elias, not with reproach but with gravity. A storm is powerful, he said evenly, but blind storms scatter. We will be more than rage. We will be their undoing, strike by strike, until nothing of them remains. The words landed heavy, not with the volume of a shout but with the weight of inevitability. Even Elias, restless flame that he was, gave a sharp nod. He knew Marcus was right. Vengeance without order was waste. Vengeance sharpened by discipline was devastation. On the lower decks, Sergeant Kieran Dax walked among his Marines as they prepared for deployment. Armor clattered, weapons hissed as they cycled through checks, and men shouted over the din. Dax moved in silence, his gaze hard, his presence alone enough to straighten spines. He paused beside a young recruit fumbling with his rifle's power coil. The boy's hands shook, not from fear of battle but from the knowledge of why they were fighting. Dax took the weapon, corrected the flaw with a few efficient motions, and handed it back without a word. The recruit swallowed hard and stood taller. That was Dax's gift, not speeches, not promises, but a silent reminder that failure was not an option. When deployment orders came, humanity moved with terrifying unity. Squadrons leapt through slip space in staggered formations, converging at predetermined coordinates like the clenched fingers of a fist. The Xeric expected hesitation, fragmentation. the endless debates of a species still tethered to old divisions. What they found instead was merciless coordination. The first strikes fell on a string of Xeric outposts nestled in an asteroid belt. Human ships slipped through the shadows of rock and ice, emerging with weapons already burning. Marcus commanded the Resolute at the spearhead, his voice steady as he issued orders. Each maneuver unfolded as if rehearsed 1,000 times, each volley landing with surgical precision. The outposts burned before the Xeric could even muster resistance. On the ground, Kirin Dax led his marines into the steel corridors of a captured station. The fighting was brutal, close, lit by the strobe of muzzle fire and the roar of men who had sworn vengeance. Dax moved like a force of nature, tearing through resistance, his presence a lodestar for his soldiers. One Xeric officer, larger than the rest, attempted to rally his troops. Dax cut him down in a storm of strikes, the alien's body crashing to the deck as silence spread through its kin. The Marines roared, the sound reverberating with a promise the Xeric could not mistake. This was only the beginning. In orbit, Elias orchestrated the fleet's next moves with unrelenting drive. He was fire-given direction, translating fury into strategy. His commands came sharp and fast, hammering at the Xeric retreat paths, ensuring no escape. Ships that fled found themselves cut off by ambushes, their desperate transmissions silenced by the void. He grinned with a satisfaction that was not joy but justice, served through annihilation. The first campaign ended with a line of shattered Xeric strongholds and the echo of human banners planted where none had been before. The galaxy had taken notice. Where once alien races had dismissed humanity as a rising but insignificant power, now whispers spread. They spoke of a species that fought not for conquest but for vengeance, and in that vengeance revealed a ferocity unmatched. The Xeric, still drunk on arrogance, responded with brutality of their own. They struck at a human colony on the fringe, obliterating cities from orbit and broadcasting the slaughter once more. Their message was clear: resistance would only bring ruin. Yet their cruelty produced the opposite of fear. It solidified humanity's resolve, hardening wrath into something colder, sharper. When the footage reached the Resolute, Elias's eyes burned with uncontainable fury. They think they can break us with terror. Marcus's reply was quiet, but his words carried the weight of an oath.
No.
They have given us no choice but to end them. Dax stood nearby, his expression unreadable, but the flex of his hands betrayed the storm within. He did not speak, because words no longer sufficed. Only battle would. The officers and soldiers aboard the Resolute knew then that this was no longer a war of defense, no longer a conflict of boundaries. It was a campaign of erasure. Humanity would not merely repel the Xeric. They would scour them from existence, every ship, every colony, every trace. As fleets gathered for the next offensive, the void itself seemed to lean closer, waiting. The Xeric had mocked humanity as pets. Soon, they would learn the mistake of awakening the beast. The Xeric had underestimated how swiftly humanity learned. Every skirmish sharpened their tactics, every encounter hardened their resolve. What began as retaliation evolved into a relentless pursuit of absolute victory. The war no longer resembled a clash of equals, but a campaign of calculated fury, with the Resolute at its heart. Captain Marcus Hale studied the shimmering projection of their next target, the Xeric shipyards orbiting a crimson star. The facility produced the bulk of their capital ships, its defenses layered in rings of steel and plasma. Destroying it would cripple their war machine. Marcus's face betrayed nothing, but his mind weighed each risk with cold precision. This strike would not simply wound the enemy. It would reveal to the galaxy that humanity's wrath carried purpose, that their fury was more than rage. It was strategy incarnate. Commander Elias Vorn stood at Marcus's side, eyes alive with restless fire. His hands traced the projected defenses, identifying weak points, predicting enemy reactions before the Council's tacticians could speak. We strike fast, before they can reposition their fleets. Precision here, and here leave them scrambling in their own yards. When their lines break, we gut the heart. His voice carried the eagerness of a man who had dreamed of this moment, of seizing vengeance with both hands and driving it deep. Marcus listened without interruption, then gave a single nod. "We move at dawn cycle. No delays." Far below, in the preparation bays, Sergeant Kieran Dax stood among his Marines as they armed themselves for boarding operations. Their mission was clear: infiltrate the largest of the shipyard stations, disrupt command, and eliminate leadership. Dax walked the line of soldiers, his gaze steady, his silence saying more than speeches could. The men knew the risks. They followed him because he did not ask them to fight, he led them into it. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and certain. "We take this ground. No retreat. No hesitation. The enemy dies or we do." The assault began with a sudden blaze of light as the Resolute and her fleet tore from slip space into the Crimson Star's orbit. The Xeric defenses reeled in shock, scrambling to respond as human ships opened fire in coordinated volleys. Plasma storms lit the void, ships shattered under precise bombardments, and within minutes the balance tipped. The arrogance that had defined the Xeric faltered, cracking under the weight of humanity's precision and fury. Elias directed the fleet with unrelenting pace, his commands sharp as blades. "Cut their retreat lines, do not let them scatter. Pin them against the yard's bulk." His grin was predatory, but his eyes glowed with satisfaction at seeing the enemy stripped of their illusions of superiority. Each enemy ship that fell was a promise fulfilled, each explosion a fragment of vengeance delivered. On the ground, Dax and his Marines stormed the station's outer decks. The corridors echoed with the clash of steel and the roar of gunfire. Every step forward rested in blood. Dax fought at the front, his massive frame carving through defenders with brutal efficiency. His men followed close, emboldened by the certainty that their sergeant would never falter. At the heart of the station, a Xeric general emerged, a towering creature draped in armor, its voice booming through the chamber as it barked orders. It believed itself untouchable, the embodiment of Xeric dominance. Dax met it head-on. Their clash shook the deck, fists and blades colliding in a storm of violence. The general fought with cunning ferocity, but Dax's rage was inexhaustible. With a final crushing strike, he drove his blade through the alien's chest, lifting it from the ground before casting it aside. The silence that followed was broken only by the thunderous roar of human Marines, their fury erupting in triumph. Word of the victory spread faster than the battle itself. Across human and alien channels alike, the message was clear. The Xeric had bled. Their stronghold was shattered, their general slain, their fleets scattered. Humanity had not merely won, they had humiliated the species that once mocked them as pets. Marcus stood on the command deck of the Resolute, his face as calm as ever, though his eyes betrayed the faintest glimmer of satisfaction. "Transmit the images," he ordered. "Let them see what happens when we are provoked." Screens across the galaxy lit with footage of burning shipyards, broken fleets, and the lifeless body of the Xeric general. It was not boasting, it was a warning carved in fire and blood. Elias watched the transmission spread with a hard smile. He leaned closer to Marcus, his voice low but sharp. "They called us emotional. Now they'll learn emotion is our strength." Marcus gave no reply, but his silence carried agreement. Humanity's rage was not reckless, it was disciplined, directed, and merciless. Later, in the quiet aftermath of the battle, Dax sat with his Marines in the battered mess hall of the captured station. He said little, as always, but the men felt his presence like a shield around them. They had followed him into the fire, and he had brought them out alive. For them, Dax was not only a leader, he was the embodiment of humanity's will made flesh, unstoppable, unbreakable. From the ashes of the shipyard, humanity sent out a single message, spoken not by politicians or diplomats, but by the unified voice of its commanders. "The Xeric have made us angry. For that, they will be erased." The words traveled far, reaching even neutral civilizations that had once ignored humanity's rise. Now they watched with unease, whispers spreading across empires. Mankind was not to be provoked. The lesson was etched into every burning wreck left behind. In the silence of his quarters, Marcus allowed himself one moment of reflection. He had seen the cost of wars before, had felt the weight of sacrifice press against his shoulders. This war would demand more than any before it. Yet as he recalled the laughter of the Xeric over the corpses of human innocents, he knew there could be no other path. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. For Elias, there was no hesitation, no second thought. Each victory hardened his resolve. Each loss deepened his fury. He was becoming something colder, sharper, driven less by anger alone, and more by the need to ensure no species ever dared mock humanity again. For Dax, the battlefield was enough. He did not wrestle with philosophy or doubt. His fists, his blade, his soldiers, these were his answers to the insult delivered against his people. And in the quiet before sleep, when others wrestled with conscience, Dax found peace only in the knowledge that the war was not finished. The galaxy had awoken to the sound of humanity's wrath, and the Xeric now realized their mistake. They had sought to mock, to humiliate, to terrify. Instead, they had unleashed something ancient, something relentless. And humanity was only just beginning. The final campaign was no longer a question of if, but when. Humanity had stripped the Xeric of their illusions, dismantled their fleets, shattered their outposts, and slain their generals. All that remained was the core, the homeworld where their species had risen, and where it would end. The galaxy held its breath, some in dread, others in awe, as the human fleets assembled in numbers never seen before. What began as scattered vessels had become a wall of firepower stretching across the stars, every ship fueled by the same purpose: extinction. On the command deck of the Resolute, Captain Marcus Hale stood in silence, eyes fixed on the tactical display that pulsed with the image of the Xeric homeworld. His face was still, composed as ever, but inside he carried the weight of every soldier, every colony, every victim whose blood demanded justice. There was no hesitation left in him. The decision had been made the moment the Xeric mocked humanity with their cruelty. Now he bore the duty of finishing what they had started. Commander Elias Vorn paced along the edge of the display, his voice sharp as he briefed the officers gathered. "We will strike in waves, coordinated to collapse their defenses layer by layer. The orbital batteries here, and here will fall first. Then the fleets break their planetary shields. Once the sky burns, ground forces move in and leave nothing standing." His tone was clinical, precise, but beneath it burned satisfaction. Every move was designed not just to destroy, but to erase. Marcus raised his hand, and the chamber quieted. His voice carried through the stillness with the gravity of inevitability. "This is not conquest. This is not expansion. This is judgment." The Xeric wanted to see what happens when humanity is angered. Today, they will learn. And when this day ends, their name will vanish from history. In the troop bays, Sergeant Kieran Dax prepared his Marines for the invasion of the surface. Rows of armored men checked weapons, tightened straps, and steeled themselves for what lay ahead. Dax moved among them, his presence steady, his silence heavier than speeches. At last he stopped before the assembled ranks, helmet in hand. His voice was low, a growl more than a speech. "This is the end. For them or for us. We do not stop. We do not break. Today the Xeric die." The roar that followed shook the walls. The offensive began with fire. Human fleets dropped from slip space into the system in flawless formation, unleashing volleys that turned the void into a storm of light. The Xeric fleets rose in desperate defense, but there was no arrogance left in them, only panic. They fought with ferocity born of survival, but humanity's fury was relentless. Elias directed the fleets with ruthless efficiency, cutting retreat paths, encircling squadrons, driving the enemy into choke points where they were annihilated. "Press them," he ordered, eyes gleaming as each enemy blip vanished from the board. "Do not give them a breath." One by one, the orbital batteries fell, their flaming wreckage raining onto the world below. The planetary shields flickered, then shattered under coordinated bombardments. The Xeric sky was set ablaze, streaked with fire from descending debris. Humanity had opened the heavens, and through the breach poured its wrath. Dax's marines landed amidst the chaos, dropships cutting through smoke and flame to carve out footholds on the surface. The Xeric resisted with desperation, but desperation could not match fury honed into discipline. Streets became rivers of fire, citadels toppled under explosives, and resistance shattered under the relentless advance. Dax led from the front, carving a path through barricades, his blade and rifle leaving nothing but silence in his wake. His soldiers followed with unyielding conviction, every step fueled by the knowledge that this war ended here. At the heart of the Xeric capital, their last warlord stood, armored in ornate steel, commanding what remained of their forces. It bellowed challenges into the smoke-filled air, daring humanity to meet it. Dax answered. Their duel unfolded amidst burning ruins, the clash of steel and the roar of combat drowning the chaos around them. The warlord fought with all the strength of a dying empire, but Dax's fury was absolute. With a brutal final strike, he drove his blade through the alien's chest, lifting the creature before casting it aside. The Xerica's final defiance ended in silence. Across the world, the resistance collapsed. Cities burned, armies broke, and humanity's forces swept across the land until nothing remained but ash and ruin. From orbit, Marcus watched the planet consumed by fire, his face as calm as stone. Yet in his eyes lingered the weight of a commander who knew the cost of wrath, who understood that in destroying an enemy, humanity had revealed a truth that could never be forgotten. Elias stood beside him, his expression colder than victory should allow. He did not see tragedy in the flames, only fulfillment. "It's done," he said, voice sharp with satisfaction. "They will trouble us no more." Marcus gave a slow nod.
"Yes.
But let this be remembered, not for triumph, but as a warning. We do not seek war. But if we are provoked, if we are mocked, if we are made angry, this is what follows." On the ground, Dax stood amidst the ruins, helmet in hand, smoke curling around him. His marines gathered in silence, their eyes fixed on the horizon where the last of the Xeric strongholds smoldered. Dax did not speak. He did not need to. The silence itself was the answer, heavy and final. When the last Xeric structure fell, humanity's fleets transmitted a single message across the stars. It carried no celebration, no gloating. Only the truth spoken in the calm, unyielding voice of Marcus Hale. The last species that made us angry? We annihilated them completely. The transmission spread, echoing across neutral sectors, infiltrating the halls of alien councils. Those who once dismissed humanity now regarded them with caution, some with fear, some with respect. They understood the unspoken law carved into the ashes of the Xeric. Humanity was not to be provoked. In the quiet aftermath, the fleets turned toward home. The war was over, but its memory would linger in every star touched by its flames. For Marcus, Elias, and Dax, there was no triumph, no celebration, only the knowledge that they had carried out the will of their people, that they had answered mockery with finality. Humanity had been tested, insulted, wounded. In response, it had revealed its truest nature, and the galaxy would never forget.